Chapter 1273. The poorer Rhodes Klein didn't visit Benson and Melissa, because the matters he was involved in were at too high a level. Approaching his siblings would only bring them disaster. For existences who didn't know Klein's original identity, such acts would help them understand the relationship between Benson, Melissa, and Klein. To know of Klein's past experiences, this would make them confirm one thing. Klein still maintained his humanity and was still very concerned about his family. Therefore, staying away from Benson and Melissa was the best form of protection he could give them. Of course, Klein had already grasped the situation of his siblings through Miss Justice. During the war, Benson had displayed his experience and ability at the Ministry of Finance. He received many promotions and had become the deputy director of the 5th Department, and his annual salary reached £300. Melissa won the favor of her mentor, Portland Moment, and was given a chance to become a Beyonder. The chancellor of the Backland University of Technology was a believer of the god of steam and machinery, so he had long become a Beyonder. He was currently a Sequence 7 appraiser. He wished for Melissa to become a Sequence 9 savant so that she could better absorb the knowledge and improve her memory. This established a good foundation for her in her subsequent development in the mechanical domain. This was Melissa's secret, but she wasn't able to hide from a spectator at the demigod level. Besides, Audrey definitely informed Klein that Melissa was more inclined to agree, and would be making a decision in the next few days. Klein's attitude towards this matter was a tacit acquiesce. On the one hand, the spiritual perception enhancement one gained from the savant pathway's advancement was rather limited. Melissa wouldn't really hear or see what she shouldn't. On the other hand, with the impending apocalypse, the madness caused by the low sequence potions would further decrease. Furthermore, there was also him, a miracle invoker, to help lower the risk of her losing control. For an avid fan of machinery, a Sequence 9 savant is enough. Moment shares the same attitude. He doesn't wish for a believer of the Evernight to obtain too many potions from the Church of Steam. Yes, the apocalypse is approaching, and the invisible barrier is weakening. The intrusion of this world by the outer deities will become more and more obvious. The chances of ordinary people encountering Beyonder incidents will definitely gradually increase. From this point of view, it's also a good thing for Melissa to become a Beyonder. If she can successfully advance to Sequence 6 artisan, or a machinery specialist, then she can fulfill her dreams and protect herself and Benson. I'll get Miss Justice to find an opportunity to disclose the acting method to Melissa in a discreet manner. The extent of her future growth will depend on her. At most I can give her some good luck. Formulas and ingredients. I'm really like an older brother who can't rest easily. I've been like this since the beginning. Does this count as granting a wish in a certain sense? Wait, Melissa definitely wishes for Klein to come back to life. If I were to walk right in front of her, would I receive enough feedback? Forget it. This will bring her and Benson a devastating disaster. Klein shook his head and stopped himself from making excuses. He then pressed down on his top hat and turned towards a hotel by the streets. He took out a gold pound and got a room. The gold pound was real. It was an item that Klein had brought back to the real world some time ago. In the previous war, Klein had donated £14,800 in cash, £14,200 worth of gold bars, and nearly 20 high-quality gems through Miss Justice. Apart from all the strange items left on the junk pile, he only had 39 lone gold coins and 10 high-quality gems left. Glancing at the hotel owner's returning change in solely and pennies, Klein put them away and entered the room before walking to the full-length mirror. Right on the heels of that, he took out a pen and paper and drew the incantation that summoned a Rhodes. Seconds and minutes passed, but nothing abnormal happened. The full-body mirror remained silent. A few seconds later, Klein chuckled and raised his eyebrows. He took out a gold coin from his pocket. Chug, chug, chug. A steam locomotive that was spewing thick smoke tore across the rail, heading west of the continent. The disheveled a cancer and a machinery hive mind member stood in a particular carriage as they focused on the metal cage in front of them. The metal spikes above the cage extended outwards in all kinds of menacing ways, coruscating with a dim light. The machinery hive mind member, who had the looks of a typical Loanese citizen, looked out the window at the planes rapidly sweeping past them. He couldn't help but ask, "Deacon, are you planning on returning to Lone after reaching Intis?" After the war ended, the Church of Steam, who had taken the wrong side, had no choice but to bear the consequences of its actions. It had to transfer all Beyonders above that of demigods, and sealed artifacts above grade 2 out of loan within a time period set by the two churches of Evernight and Storm. In other words, they had lost their original status. In the future, they could only maintain a small number of cathedrals, just like the Church of Earth Mother in Loan. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many people who believed in the god of steam and machinery, and some of them being key figures in the reconstruction efforts after the war, the Church of Steam might not have been able to retain such treatment. Similarly, a smaller number of cathedrals only required a small number of machinery hive mind members. Most of the Beyonders in Loan had to migrate to Intis. Icancer fell silent for a few seconds before smiling bitterly. I have to heed the Archbishop's arrangements, but I will take the initiative to request a return to Loan. That's where my childhood, teenage, and young adult life was. There are too many memories that I can't forget. As he spoke, his gaze grew distant, and he seemed to see the capital of capitals. At this moment, the metal cage that was overgrown with spikes suddenly trembled. Silver bolts of lightning appeared out of nowhere and landed one after another. They were all absorbed by the metal cage, and through a few wires wrapped in rubber, the current flowed to the ground outside the steam locomotive, dragging out a line of sparks. Bang! 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 The metal cage seemed to be hit by an invisible hand, but it was unable to break the barrier. The magic mirror's reaction is very intense. It's always been very quiet in the past. The machinery hive mind member who had been asking was rather puzzled. Amidst the banging, Icancer subconsciously touched his hair. That's not the case. It will sometimes show its crazy side. If it wasn't for what had happened, we would have still treated it as a grade 2 sealed artifact. Is that so? Haha, I haven't come into contact with it before, so it might just be me, but it feels to me that the magic mirror doesn't want to leave Backlund, the machinery hive mind member teased with a smile. Pa! Lightning struck and was absorbed by the metal cage. Bang! 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 The slamming sounds dragged on slowly, as though it was making its last, helpless cry. Icancer took out an old and exquisite pocket watch and opened it. It only lasted 2 minutes. It's much better than in the morning. Just as the member of the machinery hive mind, who had just been transferred over, was about to ask, he suddenly heard the slamming sound stop abruptly. It was as though it had been affected by some factor that it couldn't put up resistance to. This is the style of the magic mirror? He asked. Icancer frowned slightly and said, no, normally speaking, it wouldn't have the strength to last 20 to 30 seconds. Something's wrong. Deacon, don't worry. There is a powerful figure on board the train, one who outranks the archbishops. The machinery hive mind member beside him consoled him indifferently. There were too many dangerous sealed artifacts on the steam locomotive. Without a powerful figure watching them, there would definitely be problems. Icancer nodded, indicating that he wasn't worried. Klein was sitting in a conjured carriage in a hamlet's path more than 10 kilometers away from the steam locomotive. In front of him was a mirror. Just as he finished outlining the symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying, a wave of light suffused the mirror as golden Loanese text appeared. Exalted Great Master, you're finally here. Your puny, loyal, and poor servant, a Rhodes, misses you. Klein couldn't accept the enthusiasm behind this line as he shrank back indiscernibly. If a Rhodes's previous attempts to curry favor still maintained a hint of dignity, it was now complete fawning over him. Klein could even detect a hint of crying. The frequency of amorous news popping up in Trier is far higher than in Backlund. It should be a place that you're fond of, Klein teased Rhodes with a smile. That's because you don't wish to go to Trier. The golden words on the surface of the mirror faded their colors, turning a faint silver. Klein secretly clicked his tongue. I have something to ask you. Please ask, Rhodes replied humbly. Do you know who Earth Mother is? Klein went straight to the point. The mirror instantly turned dark as the faint silver words turned palish white. I don't know. But during the War of Gods, I heard a voice coming from deep within tenebrous heaven. He shouted a name. That's the true name of the sanguine ancestor. This magic mirror didn't dare to directly present Lilith's name. Lilith? It's actually Lilith. Klein was surprised, but he also felt that this answered many of his questions. Then, he thought of the moon Emlyn. This vampire kept going in circles, imagining all kinds of developments, only to have never changed his faith. If Emlyn had Anderson's personality, he would definitely say to the Sanguine's Grand Duke and Marquises, Hey, are you also coming to believe in the Mother Goddess? As Klein imagined the funny scene, he said to Rhodes, It's your turn to ask. Supreme Master, please continue asking. I'll ask it all at once towards the end. The palish white words regained their faint silver luster. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "How's the situation like now? For example, the situation in Faisak." Chapter 1274 The stabilization of the situation on the surface of the mirror. Silver words surfaced one by one amidst the aqueous light. Adopt Beyonders from the Church of the God of Combat and the Faisak military who are willing to pledge their loyalty. Only the extremely pious, faithful, and those willing to be martyrs, as well as a few mid and upper echelon members of the church, are to be eliminated. This is both the benevolence and compassion of the goddess, as well as the necessary measures to deal with the subsequent situation. With the apocalypse approaching, the number of Beyonder incidents will inevitably increase all across the world. To maintain the stability of the world, we have to do our best to increase our strength as quickly as possible. If we were to call the Beyonders of the Church of the God of Combat and the Faisak military, obtaining their corresponding characteristics, that still doesn't aid us in nurturing a Beyonder of the same level within a few years. A Beyonder with rich experience, be it in their digesting of the potion or accumulated knowledge, requires a sufficient amount of time. Upon seeing this, Klein mumbled inwardly. He felt that this wasn't the usual tone of a Rhodes. It was more like an official document. It's showing documents of unknown origins that it peeped at. By using words like digesting, it means that both the writer and the reader have mastered the acting method. And from the tone of the document, it's from the Church of Evernight. Based on these 2 points, it's not difficult to tell that these documents are for the eyes of archbishops and high-ranking deacons. The author should be the apostolic see from the Cathedral of Serenity. A Rhodes's secret prying abilities are very impressive. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he waited for the contents in the mirror to flip the page. The silver words vanished one after another, quickly forming new sentences and paragraphs. There's no need to spread the fact that the goddess has replaced the god of combat to the ordinary nobles and citizens of Faisak. This allows them to retain their faith in the god of combat. On the one hand, it's beneficial for us and the priests, bishops, and various major cathedrals who have surrendered to us. It will stabilize the situation in Faisak in the quickest way possible. On the other hand, it also prevents the goddess from being disturbed by the unresolvable problem of faith before she completely gains control of the god of combat's authority. An update will be disseminated after a new revelation is given. Now, we will only draw up the corresponding draft. Try not to incite the strong resistance of Faisak and other countries. We've lost too many Beyonders and soldiers, and we have expended a large amount of resources and items. Be it the church, the countries, or the people of different classes, we are all very weak. We need some time of peace and stability to recover. We should work with the Church of Storms, the Church of Knowledge, the Church of Earth Mother, countries like Feinapotter or Lenberg. We will force Intis and Faisak to make an unconditional surrender. We will obtain what we hope for at the negotiation table. During this process, we can use the purging of the stubborn old-fashioned faithful to exert pressure on them. When dealing with the domestic situation and the filling of the void left behind by the Church of Steam, the Church of Storms should be given enough respect. We can even make concessions on certain matters. This is the will of the goddess. Finally, from this moment forth, the number of times the crimson moon that appears in the sermons, preaching, rituals, and masses should be reduced. In official canon, the goddess's title of Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Klein's brows twitched as he felt a strong sense of confusion towards the last sentence. Soon, he thought of the sanguine ancestor, the ancient god of the second epoch, and the present Earth Mother Lilith, who was once a sequence 0 of the moon pathway. She was the true Lady of Crimson. In a moment of enlightenment, he vaguely understood that this might be an exchange under the table. It was a necessary price. Yes. The goddess's attitude is very clear. That is to stabilize the situation as quickly as possible. Before she truly controls the authority of death and that of the god of combat, and becomes a great old one, she undoubtedly doesn't wish for any more orthodox deities to perish. If that happened, the invisible barrier left behind by the primordial one will have no one to mend it. This will allow the outer deities to find an opportunity to bring the apocalypse forward. Also, based on Lone's present situation, if we continue the war, the anchors will waver even more. It might lead to the awakening of the primordial one in the goddess. The goddess took a huge risk having the front line retreat all the way to Backlund. She had to divert more strength to suppress the primordial one. If Earth Mother betrayed her, She might have perished even faster than the god of combat. Could she have other trump cards? The losses that the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of Storms suffered seems quite significant. It's no wonder that after the Resistance announced that they would retain the corresponding cathedrals and respect the Storm religion, that bunch of irascible fellows didn't attempt to retaliate, and they silently agreed to the establishment of the new government. Klein mumbled to himself as he had a rough idea of the current situation. He asked a third question. If the Evernight Goddess wants to advance further, does she need to find the River of Eternal Darkness? This was one of the 9 Spherote. Klein remembered a Rhodes mentioning it once, saying that this river was related to the ancient death, the Phoenix ancestor, Gregrace. The clues seemed to be hidden deep in the spirit world's Calderon city. Yes, great master. The silver words twisted and distorted, forming new text. The death at the end of the 4th epoch should have been able to use the River of Eternal Darkness. He attempted to use this Sapphira to forcefully accommodate the uniqueness of neighboring pathways. Then he went mad. So that was how death went mad back then. I knew it. A sequence 0 true god, one who has lived for 3 epochs and has seen the blasphemy slate, wouldn't lack common sense and randomly drink potions. It's not like he is a Lista tutor, having reached a point of only having the options of madness or death. It's no wonder death challenged the fractured 7 deities with just a primordial demoness. Back then, he was equivalent to half a great old one. Yes, Mr. Azek had a golden phoenix accessory that came from death. Klein strung up certain matters. Suddenly, he inwardly let out an exclamation. He suspected that the price of so many bestowments was the River of Eternal Darkness. Just like how the true creator had repeatedly tolerated him so as to force him into the giant king's residence to obtain the first blasphemy slate. As the owner of Sapphira Castle, he was probably the only relatively high sequence beyonder who could resist the corruption of other Spherote. Of course, the Evernight Goddess could also wait up to a decade or so. After the primordial ones will faded further, she could personally retrieve it. However, this way, Klein wasn't sure if she could complete the ritual before the apocalypse happened. He composed himself and raised the 4th question. Where can I get the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries? A Rhodes made the silver words reassemble into brand new content. Zeratul, first blasphemy slate, second blasphemy slate, the card of blasphemy, the fool uniqueness that has become a mythical creature. The first choice and second choice might be plotting against me. Zeratul is even more terrifying and cunning than the dark demonic wolf. If I were to plot against him, there's a high chance of me falling into his trap. The danger is extremely high. The third choice is Amon's brother. He should have used this war to become a visionary. If I were to provoke him, Sapphira Castle might not be able to save me. The 4th and 5th options are related to the half-fool of the Antigonus family. It's related to the goddess's foggy town. The goddess should have a way to circle around the half-fool and extract the card of blasphemy. But perhaps I'll need to use the River of Eternal Darkness to exchange for it. Klein realized that he had reached a dead end. The path ahead was the River of Eternal Darkness, and behind him was the leader of the secret order, Zeratul. Unfortunately, if I can find the dark demonic wolf, I can try to negotiate with him. He should have seen the first blasphemy slate and grasped the potion formula of Attendant of Mysteries. Sigh. He will flee far away once he smells me. Klein thought for a moment and said to a Rhodes. 5th question. What did you mean when you said you saw a pillar and support from me? The aqueous light in the mirror swirled slightly as the deepness became more obvious. The corresponding silver text seemed to turn a little whiter. Great Master, this is a feeling that I can't describe using words. However, I've experienced similar feelings in another existence before. Apart from him. Only you possess it. That existence is the ancient sun god. The ancient sun god. Klein nodded in thought. All right, it's your turn to ask. On the surface of the mirror, the words on the silver screen suddenly turned golden. Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes? Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes? This question appeared 5 times in a row, completely covering the surface of the mirror. Having become an angel, Klein no longer feared a Rhodes. After thinking for a few seconds, he smiled and said, Let me talk to that angel. This is basic courtesy. With a boom, illusory beams of different colors spewed out from the mirror and exploded into fireworks in the carriage. Almost at the same time, 2 dark rays of light reached out from the edge of the mirror. 2 arms that appeared surreal grew out. The 2 arms originally wanted to reach out to Klein's calf, but they silently shrank back and gently swayed on the spot. Praise the Supreme Master. After the fireworks fell, a golden message appeared in the mirror. In the middle section of the steam locomotive, in a simple room, a tall and handsome young man with long chestnut hair sat on a hardwood chair. Facing the triangular sacred emblem, he clasped his hands and closed his eyes as he sincerely prayed. On the side of the narrow table was a mannequin made of metal components. Behind the mannequin was a faint meshed glow. Suddenly, the young man opened his eyes and looked towards the other side. Someone had appeared there. And in the young man's blue eyes, the figure only looked like a person. In essence, it was an invisible vortex wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. Inside the vortex, there were transparent and distorted maggots squirming about in the cluster. Gehrman Sparrow. The young man calmly read out a name. All the items around him floated up, but there was no wind in the room. Klein pressed his top hat and revealed his human face. How may I address you? The young man nodded slightly and said, Bornova Gustav. Chapter 1275 A New Journey Bornova Gustav. Klein's gaze swept across the young man's face, landing on the floating items and the mannequin made from metallic components. The mannequins have a postmodern style. Some of the physical laws here seem to have changed a little. Klein nodded in thought. I want to take the mirror. He very honestly stated his request. Bornova's expression didn't change, as though he was just a puppet. You're a blessed of Evernight? I guess so, Klein said with a smile. Bornova nodded. Then take it away. He's of the impression that I'm asking for the spoils of war for the Church of Evernight? Klein didn't explain as he politely took off his hat and bowed slightly. Thank you very much. As he spoke, Klein's figure suddenly faded and vanished. He had only come in the form of a historical void projection. Following that, in the carriage where a Cancer and the Machinery Hive Mind member were, nothing happened. Of course, they were only situated in a historical scene, and the actual situation in the car had been covered up without their knowledge. On a carriage more than 10 kilometers away, a mirror suddenly appeared in Klein's hand. It was silver in color, and the patterns on its back were ancient and mysterious. On both sides was an eye-like ornament. Don't speak. Klein looked into the mirror and gave a simple instruction. Yes, Supreme Master. Silver words surfaced from the depths of the mirror. Klein immediately took out a pen and paper and used the magic mirror as a backing to write. He thought for a moment and wrote with a faint smile. Dear Mr. Azek, it seems like I haven't written to you for a long time, as I went to the forsaken land of the gods and had a wonderful journey. There are only 2 types of living creatures there. They are either living sentient creatures, or monsters. Those sentient beings either bear a curse or have obvious physical mutations. They're even more tragic than I imagined. I tried helping them. This wasn't only for the ritual, for my anchors, or to satisfy my sympathetic heart. It holds meaning on its own. Putting aside the suffering, the situation in the forsaken land of the gods is completely different from the outside world. It's like an oil painting with a black theme. What's surprising is that artificial death can influence the undying creatures there. I was very confused back then, but today, I finally had a guess. I suspect that this is related to the River of Eternal Darkness, one of the 9 Sphirot. This reminds me of Calderon City in the spirit world. I'm reminded of the golden phoenix accessory you mentioned before. Rumor has it that the phoenix ancestor, Death of the 4th Epoch, could use the River of Eternal Darkness to a certain extent. I wonder if you know anything about this? The war that lasted for more than a year has finally ended. The Evernight goddess clinched victory in the end, and the god of combat has perished. I believe that, with your level and status, you should know what this means. No matter what, the long-awaited peace has finally arrived. People are gradually returning to their normal lives. This is a scene that I like to see, but some wounds may never heal. I don't know if the apocalypse will arrive on time, and I don't know when you'll wake up. I can only hope that everything's heading in the right direction. Finally, let me mention something trivial. I've already advanced to Sequence 2 and am now a miracle invoker. This is both a curse and hope. I wish you well. Your eternal student, Klein Moretti. After he finished writing, Klein examined it carefully before folding the letter. He blew Azek's copper whistle and summoned the bone messenger. When the gigantic messenger emerged from the ground, its bones trembled as though it had sensed the aura of the great ruler above the spirit world. Klein chuckled softly and handed the letter to the messenger whose number was unknown. He watched it clumsily bow before disintegrating into a fountain and burrowing into the ground. After doing this, Klein cast his gaze at the magic mirror on his thigh. Sensing his gaze, the aqueous light on the surface of the mirror rippled and produced silver words. "Great Master, where are we going next?" "Where to next?" Klein repeated the question inwardly. He really wanted to teleport to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and enter the ancient palace that bordered reality and Foggy Town. He wanted to see if he had the chance to take away the most useful card of blasphemy from the Antigonus family's half-fool. With his present strength being equivalent to half a sequence 1, this wasn't an impossible task. Back when Zeratul was a sequence 2, he had managed to obtain the main ingredient of Attendant of Mysteries from the half-fool. Of course, the premise was that the Evernight goddess maintained the suppression and seal of the Antigonus family's ancestor. Hence, he had gone full circle, circling back to a deal with the Evernight goddess. The present me is the owner of Sapphira Castle. I can split a portion of the Worms of Spirit to stay above the grey fog, constantly responding to any prayers. This way, apart from having certain latent problems to my mental state, I'll gain quite a bit of benefits in other aspects. Yes, I can help my main body at any time, giving me another resurrection method. Even if my main body is completely destroyed, with the Worms of Spirit above the grey fog, I can still reassemble my will and body. However, if I were to walk in the real world and get concealed, and also end up having my connection with Sapphira Castle severed, the Worms of Spirit left in Sapphira Castle will lose control and turn into monsters, just like Zeratul from back then. Klein quickly analyzed the situation. With his current strength, he felt that it was best if he didn't venture deep into Calderon City for the time being. Even if he were to search for clues regarding the River of Eternal Darkness, he would have to fulfill many wishes and obtain the true strength of a miracle invoker. With this in mind, Klein patted the mirror and said with a smile, "Next, let's go wander together. Where do you want to go?" "Trier, no, you can go wherever you want," Rhodes replied humbly. Klein smiled and jumped off the carriage, heading towards the city closest to him. After the carriage continued for several meters, it disappeared inch by inch and returned to the fog of history. At the same time, Klein's trench coat turned into a black robe. His top hat changed in shape, giving off a classic vibe. This made Klein feel like a wandering magician walking through the streets and alleys. In a rather intact house in Backlund, dressed in holy white robes, the beautiful demoness of unaging Katerina put down the mirror in her hand and turned her head to the young man who was rocking in a reclining chair. "The war is over. They finally decided to summon me back to headquarters. I've been waiting for this day for too long," the young man sitting on a reclining chair scoffed. He was wearing a long black robe with red patterns. He had a pale white brown-skinned face with a soft outline. He was the gatekeeper possessed by the Red Angel evil spirit. Katerina pressed down on the table with both hands and sat on it. The corners of her lips curled up as she said, "You don't seem testy at all. When you get locked underground with two detestable fellows for nearly 2,000 years without being able to escape, you'll know that 2 years of waiting is extremely easy and relaxing." "I'm not in a rush at all," the Red Angel evil spirit said with a chuckle. "After this matter ends, I'll let you experience it. Of course, I'll remember to throw you 2 male companions. As for how long you can last, it's up to you to decide if you can hold yourself back." As he said this, the Red Angel evil spirit's 2 cheeks didn't reveal any retorting mouths. This was because to them, this was the truth. They and 2 other detestable fellows had been locked underground for nearly 2,000 years without any means of escape. Upon hearing this answer, Katerina's eyes darted around as she asked with a faint smile, "Aren't you worried that Primordial would learn of this once you head to our headquarters?" "So what? There's always a need to take risks in doing things. Furthermore, the worst outcome is to fuse with her. I'm already 3-in-1, so becoming 4-in-1 isn't a problem," Sauron Einhorn Medici said with a nonchalant attitude. "Let's set off." Katerina hopped off the table with a smile. Just as she finished speaking, a red-haired man with a trademark imprint on his forehead was reflected in her eyes. The gatekeeper, who wore a black, red-patterned robe, stopped breathing. His skin and flesh rapidly rotted, turning into yellow-green pus. In just a few seconds, There was only a white skeleton and a beyonder characteristic left on the reclining chair. Katerina waved her hand, pulling the beyonder characteristic over by using invisible threads. It fell into her palm. Immediately after, she lost all corporealness and suddenly entered the mirror she had used before. A dark and illusory path that appeared surreal presented itself in front of the Saintess of White. It formed a complicated and mysterious web, with similar objects in her surroundings, interweaving into a strange world that was different from reality. Katerina quickly traversed the mirror world and approached the target node. At that moment, she felt a powerful suction force. She couldn't help but deviate from the path and cast a dark and blurry fog. It represented a mirror in the real world. In an instant, Katerina, along with the Red Angel evil spirit, left the mirror and came to an unfamiliar room covered in carpets. At the edge of the room, a young man with ordinary facial features who was dressed in common clothes leaned against the staircase railings and smiled at the Demoness of White. His left hand was constantly tossing an item, a strange crown covered in rust and blood. Before Katerina could react, the young man took out a crystal monocle and put it on his left eye. Heh! The Red Angel evil spirit sneer echoed in Katerina's mind. The next second, the young man took off the monocle and shifted it to his right eye before saying with a smile, "Sorry, I wore it in the wrong spot." Chapter 1276 Wandering Magician. Upon seeing this scene, Katerina's body took a step back uncontrollably as her mind fell silent. 2 seconds later she opened her mouth and let out a male voice. "Hey, little raven." Without waiting for the young man to respond, Katerina smiled and said, "Aren't you looking down on me by bringing just a few avatars? Could it be that you're a mailman, specifically here to deliver me beyonder ingredients? Tell me, what kind of cooperation do you want? I don't hate you too much. After all, what happened back then was planned by that zealot. The mastermind was a Lista tutor, and you can only be considered an accomplice." The man opposite him caught the crown that was covered in rust and blood. He straightened up and shook his head with a smile. "I have my reservations in cooperating with you after hearing your voice. Why don't you get Sauron and Einhorn to talk to me? Tisk. TSK. It's been so many years, yet you're still as willful as a child. Do you still remember who was responsible for carrying you when you were still a baby? Who was the one who burned away your hair?" The Red Angel evil spirit mocked without any compromises. The young man opposite him used his empty hand to straighten his monocle and calmly turned around before walking out the door without any hesitation. During this process, he sighed softly. Childish. Seeing that Amon had no intention of stopping, the Red Angel fell silent for a few seconds. Before the other party walked out of the room, it controlled Katerina's body and chuckled. "Don't think that I don't know what you want to do, but it doesn't matter. Since you don't have the same thoughts as that zealot, then there's room for cooperation." Amon stopped and turned halfway to look at Demoness of White Katerina, who was possessed by the Red Angel evil spirit. The monocle on his right eye seemed to glimmer slightly. Awa County, in a city that was being rebuilt after war, inside a bar which had burn marks. "Toby, did you add too much damned water to your beer?" A man wearing an old cap took the cup and took a sip. He couldn't help but complain. The boss, who doubled up as bartender, wiped his cup and snorted. "Do you still remember the alcohol ban from before? Alec, you should be thankful that you even have alcohol to drink." The burly man, who was named Alec, murmured a few words before he focused on drinking his beer. Beside him was a bronze-skinned man with rolled-up sleeves. He looked up and surveyed the area. "I heard that the alcohol ban will soon be lifted because Faina Potter's food will soon be sent over. Also, Faysac and Intis will pay reparations with plenty of food. I can only say that I hope so. May the Lord watch over us." The bar owner, Toby, had just responded when he heard the door open. He looked up and saw a young man who seemed to be a wandering magician walk in. This man was wearing a long black robe and a classic top hat. He walked to the bar counter and sat on a high stool. "A cup of Southville beer." The man placed several copper pence on the counter. The burly man named Alec turned his head to look at the stranger and asked curiously, "Not from around here? A magician?" The young man, who didn't have any outstanding features, laughed and said, "Yes, the magic that I'm best at is to satisfy the wishes of people." Alec immediately whistled. "What did I hear? To satisfy the wishes of people? Lord, there's a fellow pretending to be a deity here. This teasing caused everyone to burst into laughter. The young man who claimed to be a magician wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "That's just a special magic trick." Oleg gulped down a mouthful of bland beer and laughed. "Then fulfill my wish and let this stingy boss treat me to a glass of beer." "All right." The young man in a black robe raised his right hand and tapped lightly on the table. With the glass slamming onto the counter loudly, the bar owner poured a glass of beer and pushed it in front of Oleg. Then, he retracted his hand and repeated his glass wiping. This scene that seemed familiar to him stunned Oleg. He shouted blankly, "Toby, you know him?" "No." The boss, Toby, glanced at Oleg like he was a fool. Oleg raised the glass of beer with uncertainty and took a careful sip to see if Toby would make him pay for it. Seeing that the bar owner no longer bothered with him, the burly man turned his head in surprise and looked at the young man in a black robe and a tall hat. "How did you do it?" "I told you that it's a special magic trick." The young man leisurely drank a mouthful of Southville beer. While Oleg remained in shock, the man beside him with rolled-up sleeves sneered. "I dare bet that you and Toby must have colluded beforehand. Your knocking on the table is to say that you'll pay for the beer." "You can make another wish," the wandering magician replied nonchalantly. "My brother and I have a house that collapsed during one of the bombings and is being rebuilt. My wish is that it will return to its original state before I return," the man with his sleeves rolled up said smugly. This wasn't an easy task. The wandering magician raised his right hand and snapped his fingers before smiling. "All right, your wish has been granted." The people who were paying attention to this broke out into laughter. They no longer paid attention to the foreigner and his clumsy magic show. After drinking, the man with his sleeves rolled up left the bar in a drunken stupor with Oleg, and staggered down the street towards the suburbs. 15 minutes later, they returned to the area where they were rebuilding their home. They were about to enter the tent that was issued by the government. At this moment, a gust of cold wind blew and made them shudder at the same time. Soon after, a 2-story building appeared before their eyes. It was a house that they were very familiar with and had spent years building. Oleg and his brother subconsciously turned their heads and saw the same confusion in each other's eyes. "I didn't drink that much. That damn Toby mixed so much water into the beer," Oleg murmured, as if he was seeing things thanks to his intoxication. His brother didn't respond. After being stunned for a few seconds, he suddenly widened his stride and rushed to the house, touching the wall and the door. "It's real, it's real," he kept muttering to himself as if he had gone crazy. Oleg did the same thing. Finally, he confirmed that their house had been restored to its original state. This made him both surprised and scared. At this moment, his brother suddenly said, "My wish was granted. That magician, that magician." Before he finished his sentence, he turned around and ran towards the bar. Oleg came to his senses and followed closely behind. Bang! They pushed open the bar's door and rushed in, casting their gaze at the bar counter. However, the black-robed and tall hat-wearing wandering magician had already left. Oleg and his brother looked around. They appeared relieved, but they also felt like they had lost something. In the square of the city, the young wandering magician was squatting in front of a 10-year-old girl. "My magic is to fulfill your wish." He turned his head and glanced at the nearby Evernight Cathedral. The little girl had run out from the Evernight Mass, seemingly preferring the empty square. After some thought, she looked at the gentle Mr. Magician and said, "My wish is for my father, uncle, and brother to come back to life. I don't want their bereavement money." The wandering magician didn't respond as he gazed deeply at the little girl in front of him. The girl pursed her lips and forced a smile. "I was just joking. Mommy said that such a wish is not something even the deities can grant." As she spoke, she lowered her head and looked at her toes. "I just want Daddy to hug me again." Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly realized that there was a shadow in front of her. She quickly raised her head and looked to the side. Standing there was a lone soldier dressed in a red shirt and white pants. He didn't hold a rifle and was wearing a hearty smile on his face. He crouched down and spread open his arms like always. "Daddy!" The little girl pounced forward and threw herself into the warm embrace. "I miss you so much." At that moment, the young magician pressed down his hat, straightened himself, and walked towards the entrance of the square. Amidst the night breeze, his long black robe swayed gently in the vast plaza. In a blink of an eye, it was Monday. In the ancient palace above the grey fog, the members of the Tarot Club appeared simultaneously and greeted Mr. Fool in unison. Klein looked around and suddenly felt emotional. The Hanged Man is currently a cardinal of the Church of Storms, and he's in charge of the Rorstad Archipelago Diocese. Although Justice has temporarily lost contact with the psychology alchemists, she has the right to become one of their counselors. The sun is an elder of the 6-member council in the City of Silver, and the moon is a sanguine earl. The star is a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernights Nighthawks. The hermit is a hidden queen at sea, one of the 10 pillars of the Moses ascetic order. Apart from the magician and judgment, the other members of the Tarot Club are all demigods. They are the upper echelons of different factions in the mysterious world. And with the support of the Abraham family, the magician has a high chance of advancing to sequence 4 secret sorcerer within the year. In other words, Judgment is the one who has the hardest time improving her strength. She is only one of the mid to upper echelons in MI9, so it's extremely difficult for her to become a demigod. Klein, who was shrouded in grayish-white fog, quickly retracted his gaze and laughed self-deprecatingly in his heart. It's finally like a high-end secret organization. However, it always gave me the feeling that this is some conference between the various factions. He then nodded at the Tarot Club members and said, "Let's begin." Chapter 1277A Qualitative Change. Upon hearing Mr. Fool's words, Alger's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly felt the feeling he had when praying to the Lord of Storms on Pasu Island. When he greeted the Fool, he didn't notice any changes in him. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but at that moment, he believed that Mr. Fool was different from before. This was something at the spiritual level, one that Alger wasn't able to describe accurately with words. He only felt that the body that was enveloped by the grayish-white fog contained a terror that was tens of thousands of times more terrifying than before. A simple sentence or simple action could suppress a person's natural order. Mr. Fool has awoken further. After the world went to the forsaken land of the gods and brought out the City of Silva, Mr. Fool went one step further in his awakening. He already has the level of a sequence 0? If it wasn't for the fact that the sailor pathway is sensitive to the level of a high-ranking person, I wouldn't have even noticed it. Alger wanted to say something, but he forgot what he was about to say. Leonard surveyed the area and saw the other members remain silent. He probed. According to the information we have gathered, there was indeed a battle of gods. The participants that have been confirmed to appear high above Backlund include the Evernight Goddess, God of Combat, and Earth Mother. As for the outcome, I believe everyone knows it very well. What are your thoughts on this? During the tarot gathering last week, Leonard had already mentioned the corresponding matter and had taken the initiative to ask Mr. Fool what had happened. Unfortunately, Mr. Fool only told him that he was recently paying attention to the forsaken land of the gods, and didn't give a direct answer. I can't understand why such an outcome would occur. Earth Mother and the God of Combat should have collectively defeated the Evernight Goddess as a mother-son duo. Katlia didn't conceal her puzzlement. Alger retracted his thoughts and said after some deliberation, "I received a report. Just as the war ended, Fainapotter changed sides. This means..." Audrey vaguely grasped something. At that moment, Derek mimicked the lady across him and raised his arm. "I roughly know why." "You!" Emlyn uttered a voice of distrust. After all, the sun had previously been isolated in the forsaken land of the gods, so his understanding of the outside world was all thanks to the other members of the Tarot Club. How could he know more about the details of the Battle of Gods than everyone present? Alger, who knew that the sun had always been honest, suppressed his curiosity and excitement from the bottom of his heart as he asked in a deep voice, "Why?" Derek looked around and calmly said, "You have to promise with Mr. Fool as a witness that you can't reveal what I'm about to tell you." "No problem." Katlia took the lead. After everyone made a promise to the Fool, Derek nodded. Earth Mother isn't the giant queen, Omabella. The real Omabella has long died. Her remains are in the City of Silver. This news was like a bomb that landed in the hearts of all the members. It created a massive upheaval that threatened to destroy their minds. For a moment, Alger, Audrey, and company were unable to say a word. It was as though they had been struck by lightning. They were paralyzed in their positions like stone statues. After a while, Leonard asked in disbelief, "Are you sure?" As soon as he said that, he began regretting his question. Since the City of Silver had the remains of the giant queen, Omabella, it meant that the whole matter was highly credible. Subconsciously, Audrey, Furs, and Zio cast their gazes at the figure at the end of the long mottled table. They discovered that there was a smile in Mr. Fool's eyes as he maintained his sitting posture without any changes. This indirectly means that he is in agreement with the information that little son just provided. Before Audrey answered the son's question, she nodded indiscernibly and said, "This can explain many things, but if Earth Mother isn't the giant queen, then why would Angel of Fate Ouroboros believe that she is Omabella? Oh, why does the god of combat want to work with her? Who is she?" Upon hearing Miss Justice's series of questions, Alger suddenly felt a little emotional. The topic of discussion amongst the Tarot Club had finally raised from kings of angels to true deities. Previously, although they had stopped the descent of evil gods and had communicated knowledge of secret histories, they had rarely directly discussed the true deities. This was a subconscious fear, a deep mark left in them due to their upbringing in the present world. And now, the members of the Tarot Club had unknowingly lost the reverence that came from the depths of their souls. Katlia didn't notice this as she focused on Miss Justice's questions. She said thoughtfully, "Perhaps that Earth Mother has always been disguising herself as Omabella. This has managed to fool the Angel of Fate, as well as the god of combat." "How is that possible?" Zio instinctively muttered. Furs took a deep breath and said, "What a horror story." At that moment, the world, who had been silent all this time, said, "Nothing is impossible. What if this cover-up had the assistance of the Evernight goddess and other true deities? A conspiracy that lasted for 2,000 to 3,000 years. Alger's eyes froze as he instinctively shrank back. He had an instinctual fear of the Evernight goddess and Earth Mother that stemmed from his soul. The Tarot Club members fell silent once again until Leonard repeated Miss Justice's final question. "Who exactly is Earth Mother?" As he spoke, he looked at the world, Klein Moretti, and attempted to get an answer from his former colleague. At this moment, they heard a long-awaited knock. It was Mr. Fool knocking on the table. Audrey and company perked up as they turned to the end of the long bronze table, waiting respectfully for Mr. Fool's answer. The Fool Klein chuckled and said, "I can give you some hints." He looked around and continued, "Why does the Church of Earth Mother like to turn the sanguine into believers? The Earth and Moon are two neighboring pathways. Legend has it that during the Second Epoch, the ancient god Lilith, who represented the moon, died because of the giant king's betrayal. She occasionally responds to the sanguine's prayers as though she hasn't completely perished." After the 4 prompts, all the Tarot Club members, including the Moon Emlyn, thought of an answer. Earth Mother's true identity is sanguine ancestor Lilith. Emlyn's eyes widened as he instinctively sat up straight. His mind was a mess as all sorts of ideas ran through it. Leonard was first astonished before he muttered in thought. A few days ago, the Church of Evernight stopped promoting the title of Lady of Crimson, and changed the prayer sign from the Crimson Moon to that of Stars. As a high-ranking Nighthawk deacon, he was qualified to read the corresponding documents. The Evernight goddess used the authority of the Moon domain as a bargaining chip? Katlia said the conclusion that lingered in everyone's hearts. At this moment, they no longer had any doubts about the true identity of Earth Mother. "Thank you for your hints." Audrey immediately bowed to Mr. Fool. After the others expressed their gratitude, they looked at the Moon Emlyn, who was still looking stupefied. "Mother Goddess is the ancestor. The ancestor is Mother Goddess. So I've never changed my faith. It's no wonder I still continue going to the Harvest Church even without Father's corresponding psychological cues. That's because my intuition told me that the Mother Goddess is the ancestor. Therefore, the ancestor has favored me and made me the savior of the sanguine." Thoughts flashed through Emlyn's mind as he found a reasonable explanation for the guilt he had previously felt. He began to believe that he was the most devoted sanguine. Glancing at the Earl, Fuzz smiled with interest. "Mr. Moon, perhaps you might become the Archbishop of the Church of Earth Mother after some time." "No, it should be the sole sanguine representative of the Church of the Earth Mother." This writer immediately came up with a nickname. "Why?" Emlyn asked in puzzlement. He believed that the ancestor would allow the sanguine to maintain their former state and not merge with the Church of Earth Mother directly. Leonard smiled and said, "Since the Evernight goddess doesn't have the title of Lady of Crimson, Earth Mother will soon have a similar honorific name. It's impossible to fool the other churches." Emlyn roughly understood what the upper echelons of the Church of Evernight were thinking. He nodded slightly and began imagining a series of scenes. His kinsman, who had previously mocked him for believing in Earth Mother, would queue up in front of him and accept his baptism. With this in mind, Emlyn's mood turned extremely happy as he couldn't help but raise his chin. After the exchange, the members of the Tarot Club fell silent for a moment, not knowing what to say. A few seconds later, Alger broke the silence and calmly said, "Most of our members are demigods, so the time it will take to advance will lengthen. Furthermore, we have our own factions. We might need a few years before having a single chance of obtaining Beyonder characteristics, potion formulas, and sealed artifacts. The focus of the gathering now might switch to exchanging information and engaging in secret cooperation." Audrey, Katlia, Leonard, and company nodded in agreement. At this moment, the Fool Klein surveyed the area and chuckled. "With the matter regarding the forsaken land of the gods over, my condition has recovered quite a bit. You can exchange items of higher levels from me." He pretended to be calm as he revealed the truth, that he was recovering. This was an answer that every member of the Tarot Club had long guessed. Just as Audrey and company were guessing which level Mr. Fool had awakened to, Klein smiled and added, "Those items of higher levels include the Sea God's identity, level, and strength." Chapter 1278 Reminder: Sea God's identity, level, and strength. Hearing Mr. Fool's example, Alger's mind went blank for nearly 2 seconds. This was something that he had never dreamed of. From his point of view, by obtaining the authority of Sea God through Gehrman's Sparrow and replacing Calvetua, Mr. Fool had obtained a stable and large number of believers. This was a crucial step for his recovery. Therefore, this secret existence definitely wouldn't give up on the corresponding identity. To his surprise, at that moment, he actually heard Mr. Fool inform everyone that the Sea God's identity, level, and strength could be exchanged. After further recovery, Mr. Fool no longer needs the identity of an entity at the level of Sea God, as well as the corresponding believers. This is the performance of a great existence. Something that isn't qualified is only used temporarily, never monopolized. Alger first sighed inwardly before feeling excited. He felt that Mr. Fool's words were directed at him. In the Church of Storms, he had relied on external forces to become a Sequence 4 demigod. Although he barely managed to rise up to the brass, it was almost impossible for him to advance any further. As for the theft of the Book of Calamity, he couldn't see any hopes of doing so at the moment. Therefore, Alger could only temporarily suppress his ambition and patiently wait for the opportunity to arrive. Now the opportunity was here. And it came fast. Alger was currently a cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms in charge of the Rorstad archipelago. Once he secretly became Sea God and controlled the authority of those waters, he would become the king of the Rorstad archipelago, a true king. With this in mind, Alger nearly couldn't contain himself. It took him a great deal of difficulty to calm himself down. Although Audrey, Derek, and company couldn't hide their shock that the Tarot Club was beginning to trade the identity, level, and strength of a deity. Even if it was only a false god, they didn't have any intentions of switching to the storm pathway. Compared to Alger, they weren't that excited. They quickly controlled themselves and cast their gazes at Mr. Hanged Man. Alger took a deep breath and humbly said to the end of the long bronze table, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what price is needed to exchange for these items?" The Fool Klein was waiting for the Hanged Man's question and said with a smile, "The missions I shall give you, as well as frequent praying and the sincere making of wishes." What he wanted to emphasize were the words towards the end of the sentence, but he believed that the members of the Tarot Club wouldn't be able to tell. As for how he could complete the corresponding wishes, he currently had 2 methods. First, he used the other Beyonder powers he possessed to achieve the corresponding effects. For example, he could summon historical scenes and repeat the segment of gifting beer to fulfill the wish of the bar owner treating the patron. Second, he could directly grant a relatively low-level wish with his accumulated power of wishes and create a true miracle. For example, using a snap to cause the collapsed house to instantly return to its original state, succeeding in rebuilding it in the full spirit of the wish. In addition, Klein could use Sapphira Castle's level and powers above the gray fog that was equivalent to a king of angels who had yet to accommodate a uniqueness. In other words, when he responded to prayers, he could use the core powers of a Sequence 1, which was also the core power of the Attendant of Mysteries. After this period of experimentation, Klein had a rough idea of the 2 effects. The first was to create a nascent divine kingdom, and the second was grafting. The term grafting was coined by Klein himself. After all, he wasn't a real Attendant of Mysteries, nor did he obtain the corresponding mysticism knowledge. This ability could allow an object that couldn't be directly connected under normal circumstances to achieve an inconceivable effect by grafting. A simple example was to mix the concept of the beginning and the end of a path into one common node, making it impossible for anyone who walked that path to leave. To Beyonders, there were quite a number of powers that could do something like that, but an attendant of mysteries' grafting directly acted on a concept itself. Not only was it at a very high level, like the descent of a true deity, but its effects were bizarre and had a hint of concealment. In addition to the replication powers of the Grade 0 sealed artifact, the Staff of the Stars, Klein could completely respond to prayers like a king of angels while inside Sapphira Castle. Furthermore, he could do more things. Upon hearing Mr. Fool mention missions, Alger suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly lowered his head and asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, do you still need me to carry out further investigations regarding the 3 targets of the Faesak Empire that participated in the Konotop Sea battle?" He had previously obtained information regarding the 3 suspected owners of Creeping Hunger, but he hadn't found anything abnormal. The Fool Klein nodded slightly and said, "There's no need for that anymore." He originally wanted to use this clue to grab the tail of the Twilight Hermit Order, but since Adam had likely become a god, it was better to avoid doing so. Respecting a Sequence 0 true deity was Klein's usual principle. He had to compromise and give up if necessary. Without waiting for Alger to speak again, the Fool Klein said in a relaxed tone, "Your current mission is to cooperate with the sea god believers, and settle down the people who have left the forsaken land of the gods." "Your wish is my will," Alger replied without hesitation. This made Derek silently heave a sigh of relief. He no longer had any doubts, hesitations, or worries about the subsequent developments. He had full trust in Mr. Hanged Man's ability to handle matters. At this moment, the Fool Klein looked around and smiled. Apart from the sea god's identity, level and strength, there are many things that can be exchanged for. For example, the imperative mage potion formula and Beyonder characteristic. He didn't list down too many examples so as to prevent himself from damaging the Fool's standing. As for having said so much, it could be explained away that Mr. Fool was in a good mood from having taken another step towards recovery. Moon City had been passed down the heritage of an imperative mage, something Klein could exchange for when granting them the wish of being saved. Of course, even if he directly made the residents of Moon City sacrifice the corresponding items, the people who had finally found his blessings and protection would definitely be very willing to do so. They were more afraid that Mr. Fool would abandon Moon City and not accept their sacrifice. Apart from that, Klein himself had a Silver Knight marionette, the Seer Pathways Sequence 9-3 Beyonder characteristics, the sealed artifact, General of the Pupilless Eye, a drop of the Primordial Moon's blessed blood, and various kinds of charms and bullets that came from Worms of Spirit. If the Wishmaker wanted a consumable or something for a temporary loan, Klein could even take out more from the historical void. The Imperative Mage's potion formula and Beyonder characteristic. Zio inexplicably felt that Mr. Fool was looking at her. To be frank, she lacked the motivation to advance. On the one hand, she was only one of the mid to high-ranking members of MI9, so the chances of getting a ticket to the ranks of a demigod were very low. On the other hand, her father's reputation had been restored to a certain extent, so she had no pressing goals. At the same time, the war had ended. Her mother and brother had returned to Backland and were about to start a normal life. With Zio's current overall income, it was enough to support a wealthy family. All of these reasons made Zio feel that her current life was pretty good, and she didn't really want to change it. Of course, if she had the chance to advance to the demigod level, she wouldn't let it go. Due to the war, she had experienced the helplessness of a Sequence 5. Furthermore, in the Tarot Club, aside from her and Furs, everyone else was a demigod. There was no doubt that she didn't want to fall behind that much. Amidst her thoughts, Zio looked at Furs before bowing her head to the entity at the end of the long mottled table to indicate that she would work hard. Furs could roughly guess her friend's attitude because it was roughly the same for her. If it wasn't because she needed to advance to Sequence 4 to effectively resist the full moon ravings, so as to stop troubling Mr. Fool, as well as the Abraham family having prepared the potion formula and Beyonder ingredients for her, she wasn't in a rush to become a secret sorcerer. As a traveler, she could go wherever she wanted. She could immediately head to a location to eat whatever delicacy she wanted. It completely satisfied Furz's initial expectations of being a Beyonder. Of course, she had another motivating factor to improve herself. After becoming a demigod, she could further help her teacher and family. Seeing the fog-covered Mr. Fool leaning back into his chair, Audrey didn't say another word. After some hesitation, she opened her mouth and said, Ladies and gentlemen, I have a question. If there's a matter, and you're aware that its outcome has nothing to do with you at all, with it solely being the result of the feelings and gambling of certain existences, what will you do? Just as she said that, Alger laughed. Everyone is destined to die. It's inevitable no matter how hard you try to change that. Then, does that mean one's life is meaningless? He seemed to have long since thought of this problem before adding, since you can't change the outcome of the matter at the moment, then try your best to improve yourself, obtain more power, and wield more authority until one day, you can participate in the gambling. If you die during this process, it's better than not doing anything. That's the most sincere words Mr. Hanged Man has ever said. It seems to come from his heart. The insignificant can also become great. Audrey was touched and nodded indiscernibly. At this moment, the World Gairman Sparrow looked around and spoke. Everyone, I have something to remind you of. When the Tarot Club members looked over at the same time, Klein controlled the world and said in a deep voice, the apocalypse will arrive in about a decade. There's a possibility for everyone to be destroyed, including the deities. Apocalypse. Zio and Furs looked at each other across Mam Hermit and sensed the raging upheavals in each other's hearts. They had never thought that the wonderful life they were living wouldn't last more than 2 decades unless something happened. This was a time where they were in their prime. Even if they weren't demigods, they didn't have to worry about the inclination towards losing control due to their aging bodies. As the person who spoke was the World Gairman Sparrow, the 2 ladies didn't suspect the authenticity of the prophecy. They momentarily felt fearful and heavy. At the beginning, Derek couldn't help but feel depressed. This was because the city of Silver had just left the forsaken land of the gods and came to the world of light. Yet, none of this would last long before the apocalypse was ushered in. Soon, he composed himself and chose to believe in Mr. Fool. Since this great existence was able to rescue the city of Silver from the forsaken land of the gods, he too could also stop the apocalypse. Although I'm the savior of the sanguine during the apocalypse, I never expected it to happen so soon. I'm only an earl. Emlyn couldn't help but frown. It was as though a student who had just attended a few days of lessons had to suddenly sit an exam. Of course, this also made him excited. After all, it wouldn't be long before he would fulfill his mission and display his greatness in front of his fellow kinsmen. Leonard had heard of the doomsday prophecy from old man Palez Zoroast. Although he didn't know the reason behind such a development, he had long been mentally prepared. At this moment, he was the first to snap back to his senses and asked, why would the apocalypse suddenly happen? There are no signs of it, Klein controlled the world to reply. It's just that you didn't notice the signs. Do you think that a battle of gods erupted for no reason? Seeing that all the members of the Tarot Club were stunned and lost in thought, the World Gairman Sparrow added, you aren't qualified to know the exact reason. Just understanding it would bring about an irrepressible corruption. Only angels and above can resist it. This is similar to what the demigod from the Church of Knowledge's demigods said. It's close to the corruption from the cosmos. I seem to have forgotten something. Mr. World seems to have figured out the whole story. Isn't he afraid of being corrupted? He's already an angel? He is now a he? Thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as she acutely sensed that the World Gairman Sparrow might have completed his advancement and become a true mythical creature. In ancient times, this could even be called a subsidiary god, a member of the deity lineup. Right on the heels of that, Alger, Catlia, and the other members of the Tarot Club understood the truth. They knew that the World Gairman Sparrow had already reached the top of the real world, becoming an angel that walked the land. Their guesses were related to Gairman Sparrow's plan to deal with a mythical creature. Some believed that it was the benefits that Mr. Fool's recovery gave to his blessed. But no matter what, it was the first time the Tarot Club had a member at the level of an angel, aside from its host and convener. Of course, they weren't too surprised by the World Gairman Sparrow's advancement to Sequence 2. They had long been numb to his progression rate. Klein controlled the world and made him look around. You can think about what you plan to do next and how you would go about doing it. Zio, Furs, and the other Tarot Club members nodded slightly as acknowledgement. Another 10 minutes of free exchange followed before this session of the tarot gathering gradually came to an end. After returning to the real world, Zio surveyed her bedroom. Her expression slowly turned solemn. She once again felt a pressing sense of urgency. After walking out of the room, Zio saw that Furs had also walked out to the corridor at the same time. She no longer suffered from momentary paralysis before coming out. "Where do you plan on going?" Both of them asked in unison before falling silent. A few seconds later, a handsome young man walked out of the guest room. He wore a pair of narrow-framed spectacles and had slightly fluffy hair. He held a few thick books in both hands. "Oh no, I forgot that I have classes this afternoon." The youth mumbled to himself as he rushed towards the staircase, completely ignoring the presence of the two ladies. He was Zio's younger brother, Rio Derry Cha. He had just entered a pre-law school. In Backland, one had to pass a pre-law examination before becoming a paralegal. Such a paralegal had to study and work for at least 5 years under a full lawyer before one was allowed to take part in the qualification examination and get a license to practice law. If one wanted to become a senior lawyer, one had to enter the Backland Lawyer School to receive university-level education. Zio watched her little brother run down the stairs, and a smile subconsciously appeared on her face. She immediately looked up and said to Furs, "I plan to return to MI9 and work hard." "I plan on making a trip to Teacher's Place," Furs answered the question. Right on the heels of that, the traveler's figure quickly turned transparent and vanished. A few seconds later, Furs appeared at a relatively intact building in the rebuilding Pritz Harbor. Then, she took out a pen and paper from her pocket and wrote a note. She planned on telling her teacher that she had finished digesting the traveler potion. Putting away the fountain pen, she stuffed the paper into the mailbox at the door. This wasn't Dorian Gray Abraham's residence. It was the place where Furs and the gentleman had previously agreed to send letters to. The next day, when Furs arrived, she saw Dorian providing her with the meeting location and time. Emlyn opened his eyes in his room and changed into his coat with a standing collar, intending to visit Marquis Nibs. When the carriage passed Rose Street, he subconsciously looked out the window and was somewhat surprised to discover that the door to the Harvest Church had opened. After a brief hesitation, he got the carriage driver to stop the carriage, and he paid for the ride. After putting on his top hat and holding his cane, the red-eyed sanguine Earl walked up the steps and entered the Harvest Church. He saw Father Utravsky, who seemed to have grown a little taller, cleaning the prayer hall with his back hunched. "He has been released as expected. It really was protective custody." Emlyn shook his head inwardly. At this moment, Father Utravsky raised his head and looked at him. "Wipe the candle stand." "I'm trying to please Mother Goddess," Emlyn mumbled. He walked to the room behind him, changed into the brown priest robe of the Church of Earth Mother, and began working. Neither of them spoke a word. They did their own jobs and tried their best to restore the Harvest Church to its former cleanliness and tranquility. After an unknown period of time, a group of people suddenly entered the door. Emlyn subconsciously looked over and saw Baron Cosmio Dora. He saw Viscount Ernst Boyar, who had once worked at the Harvest Church, and many familiar faces. Emlyn's lips subconsciously curled up. Chapter 1280 Chance meeting in the tiny city on a steam locomotive heading for Mid-Seashire's Constant City. Klein, who was dressed as a wandering magician, looked at the young man and his parents across the narrow table with items placed on it. "I have 2 types of magic tricks. The first is to let your wishes come true. The second is to use a mirror to answer your question. Of course, the first type of magic requires payment, and the second requires you to answer questions posed by the mirror. What kind of performance do you want to watch?" The young man had black hair and brown eyes. He seemed to have received a good education. He looked at his parents sitting beside him and said with a smile, "My wish is too difficult, so I won't trouble you. In comparison, I'm more curious about the mirror that can answer questions." Klein sighed as he shook his head. With a flip of his left hand, he revealed a silver mirror with a black gem on both sides. "It seems to be an antique," the young man opposite him commented with piqued interest before saying, "My question is, what is the purpose of my visit to Constant City?" A commonly seen smile, one which was often seen on the faces of street magicians, appeared on Klein's face as he stroked the surface of the mirror with his right hand and said in a serious tone, "Mirror, mirror, please tell me the answer to the question." After repeating it 3 times, he released his right hand and showed the surface of the mirror to the 3 passengers. There were a few silver words on it. "To get married." "Amazing!" The young man and his parents looked at each other in disbelief. After boarding the train, they had never mentioned anything related to the wedding, nor did they reveal anything that people could use to make the connection. This was the first time they had seen a magic trick that didn't rely on props or a fake audience. "All right, it's time for the mirror to ask." Klein smiled as he covered the surface of the mirror with his right hand. All right. The young man replied, feeling intrigued. Visit website our list novel. Com next, let's see what question the magic mirror will raise. Klein released his right hand in an exaggerated manner as though he was performing a formal magic trick. The silver words on the surface of the mirror had already changed, extending into a complete sentence. You would prefer your bride to be a woman in her 40s or above, right? The young man's expression froze for a moment before turning pale and then completely red. How is that possible? He immediately rebutted. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at his parents and grumble, "What kind of strange question is that?" "It's just kidding." Klein smiled apologetically as he hurriedly pressed his right hand onto the surface of the mirror, as though he didn't know that would happen. Then, he released his right hand. Indeed, the words on the mirror changed again. "How old are you?" 25 years old, the young man replied carefully, afraid that he would fall into a trap. He felt the gazes of his parents and the surrounding passengers on him change. All right, that's the end of the magic performance. Klein smiled as he put away the mirror. You can try another magic trick. Just as he finished speaking, the steam locomotive whistled. This was the sign that it was about to enter the station. Sorry, that's my call. Klein took out his golden pocket watch and checked the time. He carried his luggage and left the steam locomotive along with a group of passengers. He arrived at the station platform that had yet to be lit up with the gas lamps. This was Mid-Seashire's Belton City, a city that had both prospered and declined due to the coal mines. To Klein, the greatest significance of this place was that it was a strategic node in the previous World War. Faysac had taken 3 routes in its invasion. One attacked the border along the Amantha mountain range to break through the land defenses. Another involved setting off from Sonia Island, attacking the coastal harbors, and attempting a landing. The third was to follow the main railway as they marched towards Backlund for the invasion. Among them, due to the existence of the Church of Storms and the combined might of the ironclad warships and high-level arbiters, the naval forces of Faysac and Fainapotter failed to obtain the results they expected. They even failed to obtain naval superiority. And on the battlefields on the Amantha mountain range, the headquarters of the Church of Evernight blocked one wave after another. It didn't fall throughout the war, thus preventing Winter County and East Chester County from going through the fiery crucible of war. Of the 3 routes, the only successful one was the Mid-Seashire troops. They did a joint naval land operation and conquered Lone's second biggest city, Constant City, the capital of Mid-Seashire. Then they made their way southeast, rendezvousing with the Intis troops in the greater area of Backlund. Klein acted as a wandering magician. On the one hand, he had to accumulate wishes, display miracles, digest the potion, and increase his strength. On the other hand, he was planning on taking the path of the war, using his eyes, ears, and his soul to truly see the damage brought about by war. After knowing the secrets of the cosmos and the underground, he could understand the Evernight goddess's plan and accept it to a certain extent. However, this didn't mean that he was indifferent to the sacrifices. At the same time, he confirmed one thing. Even if he didn't stop George III from becoming the Black Emperor, the World War would have still erupted. However, Lone would have had the upper hand. The Evernight goddess and her allies would face the god of combat head-on, forcing him to seek help from Earth Mother. When that happened, the number of battles between the gods, the intensity, and scale would far surpass what had transpired. Due to this reason, Klein followed Faysac's invasion path and wandered forward. After leaving the station that still had traces of gunpowder, he carried the worn suitcase with a set of clothes and made his way towards the area where hotels were located. At night, he would stroll along the streets and alleys of the city and perform wishing magic for everyone. After taking a few steps forward, Klein's spiritual perception stirred as he cast his gaze to the end of the street. There was a black-haired woman wearing a simple linen robe and a tree bark belt with no socks or shoes. Ariana, the leader of the Church of Evernight Ascetics, the grounded angel, Ariana. Why would she be here in Belton? Shouldn't she have returned to the Evernight cloister at the Cathedral of Serenity? Or be sent to the Faysac capital, St. Millom, to preside over the handing over of the god of combat's estate? It isn't a simple matter if a grounded angel were to suddenly appear in such a small city. Klein was puzzled as he frowned slightly. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to ask. This wasn't because he was a busybody. If anything happened while they were in the same city, no one could escape. However, at this moment, Ariana had already vanished from the crowd. As a servant of concealment, Klein couldn't track her down even if he wanted to. Similarly, when it came to the matter of concealment, Rhodes was helpless. Klein slowly took a deep breath and turned to enter the hotel in thought. He got a room and stowed his luggage away. Then, he maintained his attire as a wandering magician and brought Rhodes along with him. Following his spiritual intuition as a seer, he walked all the way to the municipal square of Belton City. Erected near the municipal hall was a notice board that had many notices pasted over it. Klein saw that several people surrounded it. There seemed to be a brand new notice, so he approached them and stood in the periphery of the crowd, looking at the wooden signboard. In the middle of the signboard, a slightly yellowed piece of paper covered over the other notices. On the surface were black ink and Loanese writing, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am your new consul. Now I will issue 3 new laws. First law, without my permission, no living being can leave this place. Second law, all life is equal in front of the law. Even ordinary people can kill angels. Third law, those who commit the crimes mentioned below will be punished severely. The highest penalty being the death sentence. 1. Murder. 2. Theft. 3. Chanting the complete honorific name of a deity. 4. Offering sacrifices to evil deities. 5. Fraud. 6. Leaking secrets. An announcement like this. Klein pricked up his brows when he saw this. Without using his spiritual intuition, he could sense that there was something wrong with the content. He instinctively tried to make his spirit body return to Sapphira Castle. But an invisible force blocked his departure, making it impossible for him to make contact with a grayish-white fog. Klein narrowed his eyes as he took a few steps back to distance himself from the crowd. From his point of view, an abnormality of this level had reached a near-deity level. He had previously been in situations of not being able to return to Sapphira Castle, but the reason was that he didn't have the time to take 4 steps counterclockwise, recite the incantations, or he had been obstructed and interfered by himself. There was only one instance when he failed to leave the real world due to external forces. It was a powerful seal personally created by the Evernight goddess in the foggy town. Apart from that instance, even blasphemer Amon couldn't do such a thing. Of course, at that time, Amon's main goal was to force Klein to stir Sapphira Castle before he seized the opportunity to use a loophole to replace him as the great ruler above the spirit world. Otherwise, this angel of time could have used his ability to steal Klein's thoughts to stop him from returning. Who is this new consul of Belton City? Is this the reason Ma'am Ariana came here? As his thoughts raced, Klein made the magic mirror slip from his wide sleeve into his left hand. What happened? Klein asked softly. The aqueous light on the silver mirror's surface shook wildly as slightly pale silver words appeared. A few rules here have been replaced. As for who did it, there's no way of knowing. Great Master, you can try finding the servant of concealment, Ariana, to learn the truth from her. Are you satisfied with my answer? The rules have been replaced. Lawyer? Arbiter? Or a bug? Klein thought as he looked around. He realized that the citizens in the square were puzzled, perplexed as to why the new notice would mention angels. Why did they have to request permission to leave? The war had already ended. Chapter 1281 Anomaly Inside a Bar in Belton City. Roy, Biles, Phil, and Pasha sat around a small round table, guzzling down Southville beer. They didn't talk much as they listened to the drunkards in the next table discussing supernatural powers and mysticism incidents. Before this I saw that, not only do the Phasacians look like bears, but they could also control fire, throwing them out like javelins. No way. Supernatural powers actually exist? Haha, that's because you don't know a thing. I was drunk one day and slept near the cemetery. I saw people from the Church of Evernight appear with a few ghosts out. Yes, ghosts. They floated in the air, and it was terrifying. It was unknown if the drunkards were sharing stories from personal experiences or from hearsay, but the way they described it was with so much agitation that saliva kept flying as their faces flushed red. That's what they're like. They only become more excited after drinking. They always like to brag and be dramatic despite usually being depressed. Biles was a Belton local. Upon seeing this, he explained, ever since the coal mines began to run dry, young people gradually left Belton and headed for Constant and Backlund. The atmosphere here has become more and more oppressive, and the city is just declining by the day. This man, who was less than 30 years old, had also been a miner when he was young. He was lucky to survive in the mines. His skin was tanned from all the labor. His exposed muscles weren't too exaggerated, but it gave people the feeling that they were made of steel. As the leader of the group, Roy smiled and said, "What they're saying might be the truth. They're not bragging. The previous war has indeed exposed supernatural powers to many people, especially the soldiers who were directly involved. As long as they're still alive, they will have the corresponding experience. Besides, this also brings about many fortuitous encounters, making it so that people who had zero chance of interacting with supernatural powers or true mysticism to become beyonders." The way he expressed himself was very subtle, as though he was talking about others, but in reality, this was exactly what the four of them had experienced. Biles and Roy had participated in the defense of Belton City before. Phil had once been ransacked by the Phasacians, but he was lucky to not have died. Pasha and her former citizens had seduced and ambushed a few Intis soldiers in the harbor battle. They had witnessed the deaths of many of their friends and obtained supernatural powers due to various reasons. After that, due to the chaos brought about by the war, they either lost contact with their unit, or they avoided it on their own accord without the officials learning about it. Slowly, they got to know each other and became friends with each other due to their common experiences. This time, they had come to Biles's hometown in Belton to seek out any friends and family who might have survived. The reality of this world far exceeds our imaginations. Pasha, who had long dark blonde hair and deep blue eyes, sighed. She was only in her 20s, and she was quite good-looking. However, her face was a little thin, accentuating the protrusion of her cheekbones. This made her look much older than her actual age. In the future, we will lead different lives. Roy, who had the typical Loanese characteristics, raised his cup. To a brand new future. Before he could finish speaking, someone in the bar suddenly screamed. The experienced Roy and company quickly raised their vigilance and cast their gazes over. They saw a young man dressed in ordinary clothes, lying on the ground, rolling back and forth as if he was in extreme pain. Under the dim yellow gas wall lamps, everyone realized that the clothes on the young man's back had been torn open, revealing blood-red streaks. It was as if he had been whipped by a whip. However, no one around him held a whip. The victim had only let out one scream. This was only possible if he had been whipped countless times in an instant. But if that were the case, how could no one notice it? He's holding a wallet. Could this have something to do with the anomaly just now? The thin Phil took several looks and said after some deliberation, "Shall I take a look?" Roy thought for a moment and nodded. "Be careful." Phil grunted and walked over from the small round table. With the help of the crowd, he approached the young man who was now whimpering instead of rolling about. He quietly extended his left hand. His target was the seemingly ordinary leather wallet. "Ah!" Phil suddenly screamed as he watched his left wrist snap and land on the ground. Blood splattered from the stump onto the faces and bodies of the people around them. The scene instantly froze. The drunken guests were first stunned before swallowing their saliva. Then, they turned around and ran frantically towards the door or to the corners. "Something's wrong. No one attacked me." Phil nearly fainted from the pain, but he still forced himself to tell Roy, Biles, and Pasha what he had just experienced. Roy's eyes narrowed as he decisively said, "Let's get out of here first." He then turned his head and said to Biles, "Pick up Phil's hand and preserve it well. I remember that a military doctor I met before is also from Belton. After he got discharged from the army, he came here and opened a private clinic. He can effectively treat this kind of wound." The military doctor named Weber was also a Beyonder. When he participated in the war in the South, he had advanced step by step, obtaining medical skills that surpassed reality. It was said that he could sew up a severed limb and restore it to its former flexible state. "All right." Biles agreed without hesitation. He took a few steps forward, took out a wooden box, picked up Phil's severed hand, and put it in. At the same time, Pasha used the mystical ointment she had bought previously to stop Phil's bleeding, and bandaged it. Soon after, the group of four left the bar. After many inquiries, they finally found Weber's clinic with the help of passers-by. The clinic hadn't closed for the day, and the light from the gas lamps inside spread outwards, casting a dim yellow light. Roy politely pulled at the doorbell again and again as he heard the ringing echo inside. However, after a few minutes, no one came to open the door. He's drunk. Pasha looked at the miserable Phil and made a guess. Roy shook his head. I remember that Weber isn't one to drink. Other than being more amorous, he doesn't have any bad habits. Perhaps he's currently... As he spoke, the middle-sized man with a face full of weathered pockmarks pushed the door open and realized that it was not locked. It was ajar. As the door opened, Roy, Biles, and the others saw two figures. Two figures were hanging in the middle of the clinic. Due to the wind blowing in from the outside, they swayed gently. One was a man in his 30s wearing a white coat, while the other was a young lady in a nurse's uniform. Their lower bodies were naked and their eyes were protruding. Their mouths were half open, and their tongues were squeezed out. They were hung on the ceiling by an invisible rope. Their expressions were filled with fear, despair, and blankness. Weber. Roy recognized the dead man. He, along with Pasha, Phil, and Biles, felt a chill run down their spines. They didn't know why something like this had happened, nor did they know what kind of horror such an unknown might bring. Boom! The sound of a chair being knocked over sounded from the side, jolting the dazed Roy and company. They looked in the direction of the voice and saw a lady carrying a baby standing up in a fluster. She whispered in horror and confusion. They were having an affair. What had this got to do with their encounter? Roy took a deep breath. He felt that he shouldn't stay here for long. He quickly instructed, "Let's go." He didn't ask Pasha to comfort the lady, nor did he attempt to obtain the clinic's disinfectant and bandages. Biles and the others swallowed their saliva with great difficulty, turned around, and warily left the clinic. To Phil, the horror of the unknown had completely suppressed the pain in his left hand. What exactly happened? Phil asked as he turned into another street, asking as his facial muscles winced. How would I know? Biles blurted out. He had seemed to lose control of his emotions. Roy looked around and exhaled. Calm down. This should be a terrifying beyonder matter that has exceeded our imaginations. Right. All of this is too strange. That can be the only reason. Pasha nodded in agreement. Then what should we do? Phil asked anxiously. Roy thought for a moment and said, let's try to leave Belton. Also, analyze what happened before and summarize the patterns hidden within. We can't be sure of the anomalies we might encounter later. We can only ensure our own safety after knowing the underlying rules. Right. Biles calmed down and agreed with Roy. They discussed as they walked, gradually having some ideas. Weber was hung for adultery. Before Phil's hand was cut off, he tried to take the wallet. That's a form of theft. Pasha summarized the common point the two incidents had in common. Roy suddenly had an idea. Could it be that they suffered such a situation because they did something illegal? How is that possible? Biles and Phil both replied. As soon as he said that, they suddenly had a corresponding guess, and their expressions turned solemn. Maybe there's an invisible law enforcer. That's the essence of this beyonder incident, Biles said in thought. Roy tersely acknowledged and said, that's highly possible. Next, we'll take note of our actions. Pasha and the others nodded and walked on the streets cautiously. Not long after, they arrived at the municipal square and saw that there were many people standing around the notice board. Notice! Roy and the others exchanged looks, wondering if it was a warning that the officials had given to the supernatural incidents. Hence, they approached and used the light from the street lamps to look at the notice on the wooden board. There was a piece of white paper stuck in the middle, and beneath it was a piece of yellow paper. It seemed to be an annex. As they quickly scanned through the notice, Roy, Pasha, and the others quickly had their eyes filled with horror. They seemed to understand the source of the matter. After reading the paper, their eyes landed on the yellow paper. All citizens are to arrest foreigners using all possible means. Arrest foreigners. Roy and the others felt their hearts tighten as they instinctively looked at the citizens around the notice board. As if sensing their gazes, the citizens turned around and cast their gaze at them. Under the dim yellow light from the gas lamps, their eyes seemed to glimmer with a strange light. Chapter 1282 Crime. Haha, how can someone tell at a glance if another person is a foreigner? How do you distinguish that? Roy forcefully composed himself and pretended to be discussing the yellow paper's contents with his companions. He used the hidden meaning in his words to console Phil and Pasha so that they didn't need to panic. After all, other than Biles, who was a native, the remaining 3 were also citizens of Lone. They didn't have any southern continent blood in them. Nothing about their facial features stood out. But this is a supernatural incident," Pasha stammered. "This couldn't be judged by common sense." Roy's heart froze as he looked at the citizens who were slowly approaching in a deadpan manner. He quickly shouted in a low voice, "Run!" As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and ran towards the nearest street entrance. Pasha and Phil followed closely behind. As a local, Biles tacitly held the rear, covering the surface of his skin with illusory fish scales. Bang! 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 A few citizens raised their dual-barreled hunting guns and fired. Roy, Phil, and Pasha were Beyonders who were relatively good at fighting. While running, they would occasionally change directions or roll forward, successfully dodging the attacks. Following that, under Pasha's guidance, they passed through the streets and escaped their pursuers before hiding in an empty dark corner. "What should we do?" Phil, who had lost a hand, panted as he asked. "From the contents of the notice, we probably won't be able to leave this city. We need to figure out the rules and find a way around them." Although Roy was also very flustered, he still forced himself to calm down and think, lest the morale of the entire squad crumbled. Pasha looked at the wary Biles and asked, "Has such a notice ever appeared in the past?" Biles nodded. "Yes, although I rarely had the chance to go to the municipal square, I've been assembled there back when I was recruited into the army. I've seen that notice board. There shouldn't be any problems with the notice board. Perhaps those 2 pieces of paper are the key. The laws written on them contain mystic intent," Pasha said. Roy immediately expressed his agreement. "That's right. Besides, I suspect that the laws have to be made public before they are put into effect. If we can find an opportunity to rip off those 2 pieces of paper, the corresponding restrictions might disappear." After hearing Roy's words, Pasha, Phil, and Biles fell silent. After a few seconds, Phil's facial muscles twitched as he said, "Let's give it a try. If we continue to be trapped in the city, even if we aren't caught by those citizens, we might be punished for various reasons." Although they were all Beyonders, their sequences weren't high. It wasn't a problem dealing with a few ordinary people, but facing the enmity of an entire city was extremely dangerous. After the palm was covered with skin and became normal, the Beyonders recovered. They retreated a few steps in shock, surprise, and fear. The scene just now had exceeded their understanding. "By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a wandering magician." The person who had committed a fraud and a case of destruction of public property was none other than Klein. He swept a glance at the 4 Beyonders and said with a smile, "My best magic trick is to grant someone's wishes. Do you have a wish you would like granted?" Upon hearing this question, Roy's spirits rose as he asked with hope, "Can you take us away from Belton?" "Of course, I'll do my best to do this, but not now." Klein gave his promise. Then, he looked at the handless Phil. "He just said his wish. What's yours?" "Let my hand recover," Phil probed. "All right." Klein cast his gaze at Biles. "Take out his hand." After hesitating for a moment, Biles took out the wooden box as per the mysterious man's instructions and returned the hand inside to Phil. "Come here," Klein said with a smile. Phil mustered his courage and walked over with his severed hand. "Remove the bandages," Klein continued to instruct. "Place the severed arm in its original spot. Let me remind you, don't have it reversed. Otherwise, you'll have to chop it off again and repeat the process." Seeing how confident the other party was, Phil felt a little more confident. He quickly pulled off the bandage that had been stuck to his wound with a twisted expression as he hissed. After placing his severed hand at the stump, Klein took out a piece of white paper and approached. Then he reached out to wipe the wound. Silently, the piece of paper split into 2 while Phil felt the pain disappear. He quickly looked down and saw that his left wrist was perfectly intact. He couldn't even tell that he had been hurt before. Phil subconsciously moved his fingers and realized that he didn't lose any of his motor skills at all. "Your wish has been granted." Klein took 2 steps back and smiled. "Thank you," Phil replied in a daze. Klein looked at the other 2 Beyonders. "What's your wish?" Upon seeing that Phil's wish had really been fulfilled, Biles immediately stepped forward and said, "I want to know where my family is." Klein flicked his left arm and took out a silver mirror with ancient patterns. He lowered his head and said with a smile, "What is the answer to that question?" The surface of the mirror shimmered with aqueous light as silver words appeared one after another. Belton Glorin Cemetery. Upon seeing this, Biles, who had his neck craned, felt his heart sink as he couldn't help but feel a strong sense of sorrow and disappointment. In the next second, new silver words appeared from the aqueous light. S. Gravekeeper's Hut. This means that... Biles felt his sorrow turn to happiness as he sincerely said, "Thank you." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly thought of two questions. How many people could live in the graveyard? How many gravekeepers could there be? His family members definitely numbered more than 2 or 3. Biles's expression oscillated between gloom and joy before he fell silent. As a result, he didn't see the question posed by the silver mirror. "Great master, did I answer kindly enough?" "Yes." Klein nodded indiscernibly as he cast his gaze at the remaining lady. Pasha thought for 2 seconds and said, "My wish is for you to protect us until we leave Belton alive." She realized that Roy's wish was problematic because they might not necessarily leave Belton alive. "Smart." Klein praised with a smile. "Your wish will be granted." "Then what price do we have to pay?" "I'm referring to the payment for watching your magic." Pasha hurriedly asked. "Your wishes are the price," Klein replied briefly before asking thoughtfully. "If you know certain things are fake, but if you are willing to subjectively use them, it shouldn't be considered fraud, right?" When Roy and company heard this, they were puzzled. After pondering for a moment, they shook their heads and said, "Definitely not. This is actually a game between 2 parties. A voluntary action that has a clear understanding of the actions is definitely not a scam." "There's no doubt about it." After hearing their answers, Klein smiled. "Very good. This is what the average person will think." As he spoke, he grabbed a few times with his right hand, dragging out a woman in a simple robe with black long hair. It was the historical void projection of the Evernight Cloister's matron, Ariana. Klein looked around and saw nothing unusual. He smiled at the projection and said, "Madam, what exactly happened?" Ariana's eyes darted about slightly, turning deep and quiet instantly. It made one feel a sense of serenity from the bottom of their hearts. She calmly spoke. "The chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat, Larian, escaped. I'm tracking him." Ariana paused and said, "After I came to Belton, I received new information. According to our intelligence, Larian took away a sealed artifact when he escaped. 0-02. Chapter 1283 Gradually Deepening 0-02. Klein inwardly repeated the serial number, feeling that the problem might be more troublesome than he had expected. Although it couldn't be said that 0-02 was definitely more terrifying than 0-05 since the true essence of the magic wishing lamp was that of a sealed outer deity, an entity far stronger than the present true deities. He could definitely destroy this world or even this solar system if not for the restrictions of the outer shell. However, the smaller the number meant that 0-02 was likely more dangerous and more difficult to seal than 0-05 in most cases. At the end of the 4th epoch, the 7 churches had serialized the batch of Grade 0 sealed artifacts to 2-digit numbers. Being only second to 0-01, it's totally possible to imagine how terrifying 0-02 is. However, the God of Combat didn't seem to make use of this sealed artifact in the Battle of Gods. Was it not suitable for direct combat? Or was it too dangerous? It didn't distinguish between friend and foe? Thoughts ran through Klein's mind. His expression gradually turned serious. "Ma'am, what do you know about 0-02? Ariana slowly shook her head and said, "When the various churches inform each other of the Grade 0 and Grade 1 sealed artifacts, they only mention the serial numbers." "That's right. The information regarding a Grade 0 sealed artifact is strictly confidential internally to a church. As part of the brass, they usually have to be in charge of a particular Grade 0 sealed artifact before they can come into contact with any related information. Furthermore, there's a high chance that the corresponding memories will be erased after everything is over. This is, on the one hand, to prevent important information from leaking, and on the other hand, there's the fact that just knowing about Grade 0 sealed artifacts in most cases can result in danger or cause the seal to be ineffective." Klein asked in thought, "Didn't the church already take over the Church of the God of Combat?" That way, They could have obtained all the files on 0-02. Ariana looked at the nearby Roy and Company and said, Larian destroyed all files regarding the Grade 0 sealed artifacts before escaping. Impressive. Such an abnormally cautious fellow is really annoying. Klein thought and said, what comments does the goddess have of 0-02? From his point of view, the Evernight goddess and the god of combat were existences from the same period. Furthermore, she was in control of the concealment authority. The goddess had a high chance of understanding the situation that the latter grasped. In addition, it was impossible for the sealed artifacts at the level of 0-02 not to leave any traces in history. They might have created many disasters, so they were no stranger to high-level figures of that era. Ariana seemed to have recalled the situation from a long time ago. She stated without any pause. In the past revelation, the goddess called 0-02, the Book of Rules. Book of Rules. That's even more terrifying. Klein's eyes narrowed as he made plenty of connections. In his past life, he was a gaming enthusiast who played a broad genre of games despite not being too obsessed. He wasn't unfamiliar with the term Book of Rules at all. At this moment, Ariana added, the fact that you happen to be in Belton City might reveal some of the characteristics of 0-02. Yes, it's quite normal for Ma'am Ariana to encounter such an anomaly while tracking the chief shepherd, Larian, to Belton. But for me to also be here, it's too much of a coincidence. In mysticism, excessive coincidences often mean that there's something wrong. Is someone setting me up, or is it the effect of the law of beyonder characteristic convergence? Based on the present situation, the setup doesn't seem targeted. And how I'm already the owner of Sapphira Castle, I can more or less sense something abnormal. If it's the law of beyonder characteristic convergence, eliminating the exiled Mr. Dorr and the Antigonus ancestor who is sealed in the foggy town, the only ones that can influence me to this extent are Zeratul and Amon. However, I've always been deliberately avoiding Zeratul. Amon's true body should be under the true creator's pursuit. If it's just an avatar, it's impossible for it to produce such a powerful convergence effect. Yes, there's another possibility. The law of convergence between Spherote. 0-02 attracted Sapphira Castle, causing me to coincidentally come to Belton today? If that's the case, even if 0-02 isn't a Sapphira, it's definitely related to one. Klein, who had already suspected something, suddenly thought of a lot. He had a vague grasp of 0-02. He thought for a moment and said, from the development of the situation, the rules are gradually becoming stricter. That piece of yellow paper is evidence. Does this mean that the extent of 0-02's coming to life or the degree of reawakening is becoming deeper? Ariana nodded serenely and said, that's right. We have to find it before something happens, and also try to seal it. That's why it's best we split up and expand the search radius, saving as much time as possible. Klein had no objections to this. After some thought he said, Ma'am, you've told me so much. Isn't this considered leaking secrets? No. Ariana gave a rather clear answer. Leaking secrets refers to informing the outside world of the anomaly in Belton via any way. This has cut off any physical connection between us and the outside world. That's fine. At least, there's no need to worry about any problems with our usual conversations. In short, it's fine if we don't curse. Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief and asked, the Nighthawks and mandated punishers here will abide by the rules on the notice? Yes. Ariana gave an affirmative answer before her figure faded away and disappeared. After watching the matron of the Evernight cloister leave, Klein quickly sorted out the information he had just obtained and gained some understanding of the possible developments that were to come. Combat wasn't the main point. The crux of the problem was whether he could find 0-02 in time and think of a way to seal it. During this process, what they would face as foreigners would become more and more complicated. They would find it increasingly difficult to abide by the rules and the citizens that were controlled. With this in mind, Klein cast his gaze to Roy and Company not far away. He asked with a smile, what are your thoughts on what you just heard? Roy exchanged looks with Pasha and said, we don't know what a Grade 0 sealed artifact is, but we can guess that 0-02 is a very terrifying item. It can set the rules and even change reality to a certain extent. Furthermore, this anomaly seems to change as time passes. Also, the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat should be a very powerful beyonder. Klein gently clapped his hands and smiled. That's about it. If we don't work hard and hope to avoid danger by hiding, then there will be more and more things that we need to take note of. If we aren't careful, we might commit a crime. Heh. Perhaps in the end, we will be executed on the spot because we stepped out the door with our left foot first. His words left Pasha, Biles, and the others in a panic. It was indeed funny to hear the possible developments, but on second thought, they could sense the extreme horror hidden within. A few seconds later, Pasha said with a solemn expression, "Furthermore, the citizens can use any means to deal with us, but we are unable to fight back. This is because killing and voluntarily causing harm are very serious crimes. We can try to deceive their senses, but we can't use it too many times," Klein said casually. "What we need to do now is to quickly summarize the rules that 0-02 follows. That way, we can find it and seal it before it comes to life or awakens to gain true intelligence. What are your thoughts?" Marauder Phil thought for a moment and probed. "It doesn't seem capable of attacking us directly. It can only punish us when we violate the rules and commit crimes." Klein snapped his fingers and said, "That's right. I can summarize this law for now. 0-02 cannot punish those who do not commit crimes." Biles blurted out, "But it can make the citizens arrest foreigners. Foreigners aren't considered criminals." "This does contradict the previous law from before," Klein replied with a smile. "However, in history, many cities have come up with laws that include discrimination and the expulsion of foreigners in the different stages of their development. Did you decipher any deeper laws from this matter?" The four Beyonders frowned one after another, unsure what the powerful magician opposite them was trying to express. After a brief silence, Pasha, who thought of the question he had asked, asking whether a particular action was considered fraud, hesitated and said, "The rules issued by 0-02 must match the public's understanding and be acknowledged to a certain extent?" "That's a good idea," Klein praised. "This is a guess thanks to the law regarding the arrest of foreigners. It has been verified from your previous feedback, so we can temporarily list it as its second law. This can help us determine which actions are crimes and which aren't." Seeing Pasha receive the praise of the powerful magician twice, Roy hurriedly added, "It will constantly increase the number of laws, reaching a certain level of complexity, thereby limiting us. No matter what we do, we will be punished. Yes, on the basis of arresting foreigners, clauses such as the trespassing of private property and the prohibition of defecation or urination in public will make life harder for us with the passage of time." Just as Klein nodded in agreement, his spiritual perception was triggered. He instinctively raised his head and looked at the notice board. He realized that a goatskin parchment had appeared on it at some point in time. "Curfew order." Pasha and the others also noticed this change and their eyes widened. It was already late at night. If they stayed outside for some time, they would violate the curfew and suffer some punishment. Then, the punishment would worsen each time until they were sentenced to death. "Let's go. We haven't got much time." Klein pressed down his tall hat and said with a smile, "Our target is most likely a book. It might still be with the chief shepherd, or it might have already been hidden somewhere. My intuition tells me that it might be the latter. This is because to anyone, that item is too dangerous, and it will only become more dangerous. Of course, the premise is that the chief shepherd hasn't gone crazy, only using 0-02 to create a chance to escape pursuit. By the way, I forgot to tell you that the chief shepherd is a grounded angel." "Angel?" Roy, Pasha, and the others who had just begun to move froze. Chapter 1284 Limitation Loophole. In the present era of this world, belief in a deity was common. The difference was which deity they believed in. Therefore, even if Roy, Pasha, and company didn't understand the meaning of angels and mysticism, they had more or less heard of legends about angels from the priests, bishops, and seniors around them. They knew that they were the servants of deities, and were powerful creatures that were qualified to be addressed as him or her. Every action of theirs could create miracles. They were definitely not something ordinary people could compare with. In the hearts of these four Beyonders, angels were of a whole different level, holy spirits of another world. Under normal circumstances, they lived in the divine kingdoms and wouldn't descend into the real world. They could be treated as true legends without considering the meaning they had in reality. Just like the battles they had experienced in the past, although they would occasionally encounter Beyonders today who struck terror in their hearts, like today, them being angels was the last thing on their mind. The two weren't on the same level. But today, a wandering and mysterious magician had informed them that the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat was an angel who walked the land. Phil and the others believed in the mysterious gentleman, who had shown all kinds of amazing feats, from the bottom of their hearts. Firstly, he had granted their wishes and was friendly enough. Secondly, they didn't believe that they were qualified enough to be deceived in such matters. To them, the chief shepherd was an angel or an abnormally powerful beyonder. In essence, there was no difference between the two. The reality of this world far exceeds our imaginations. The words that Pasha often said flashed through her mind. Roy made further connections. He remembered that the lady, who Mr. Magician had invited from thin air, mentioned that she was pursuing the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat. Furthermore, she seemed to be qualified to see the Evernight goddess's revelation. The only person who can track an angel is probably another angel. With Mr. Magician's performance in front of that lady, his level can't be that much lower. Roy hurriedly retracted his gaze from Klein's back, and didn't dare to look at him directly. He looked left and right and realized that Phil had come to a similar guess as well. A complicated feeling emerged from his pale face, one that was a result of his blood loss. Biles held his breath and only spoke after a few seconds. No wonder there's such an inexplicable change in Belton. It's not the time to feel poignant about this. Let's hurry up and leave. The curfew is about to take effect, Klein reminded with a smile without any signs of nervousness. Pasha quickly looked at the notice board and imprinted the contents into a brand in her mind. From 8 at night to 8 in the morning. Free movement and assembling in the streets are forbidden. Where should we go? She blurted out. Under the double restrictions of the curfew and the no trespassing clause, it appeared as though they could only await punishment. Klein smiled and said, only movement and assembly in the streets are forbidden. As he spoke, he pointed at a nearby manhole which led to the sewers. Biles's eyes lit up. Yes, it didn't say that we can't pass through the sewers. When curfews were in place previously, the tramps hid in the sewers or abandoned buildings. Roy and the others didn't hesitate any longer. They immediately went forward and used the advantage of their strength to push open the manhole cover and climbed into the sewers. In the pitch-black darkness, a dim yellow light lit up as a lantern appeared in Klein's hand. As they followed the mystical magician, Phil said thoughtfully, we can head to a hotel next. Biles is a local. He won't be attacked, so he can get a room. Then we can climb through the window and enter from the outside. As we have gotten permission from the owner, we wouldn't be considered as trespassing on private property. In that case, we can stay until dawn and wait for the curfew to end. It's a very interesting idea, but our goal isn't to survive until dawn, Klein replied with a smile as he walked ahead of them with the lantern in hand. Roy nodded and said, if we don't do anything and stay in the hotel, the rules will increase one by one, becoming so detailed that guests aren't allowed to stay in hotel rooms. Actually, the most interesting thing about that proposal isn't the finding of loopholes to the restrictions, but that it reminded me of something. Klein turned his body slightly and looked at Biles. As a local from Belton, he actually didn't attempt to capture us foreigners. In other words, he wasn't affected by the Yellow Paper's orders. Pasha and the others all turned warily to look at Biles, clearly showing suspicion on their faces. Their encounter earlier had made them certain that the citizens of Belton City had lost their minds in the foreigner arresting affair. I don't know why either, Biles also murmured in confusion. Are you still a Belton citizen? Klein asked casually as he slowly walked in the damp and smelly sewer. Biles followed behind him and answered with some certainty. Of course. Klein thought and asked. On the one hand, you are a citizen of Belton. On the other hand, you are a standard foreigner. Two of your attributes overlap, causing a contradiction. Under that order, you will neither be attacked, nor will you have your rationality affected. If we can create such a contradiction, does it mean we will be able to escape the limitations of the rules? Phil asked spiritedly. Pasha shook her head. But such a contradiction is very hard to create. At least I can't think of any possibility right now. She suddenly paused and hesitated before saying, the most important thing is that we're far away from the notice board. We don't know what other laws will follow. We have no way of avoiding them. When that happened, they wouldn't dare to do anything. Klein smiled and said, don't worry. This mirror can help us see the new content on the notice board. He casually displayed the magic mirror that had slipped into his left palm. Pasha heaved a sigh of relief and asked curiously, "Isn't this a crime of peeping?" On the surface of the silver mirror, words that resembled dripping blood appeared. "The way I look at the notice board is like looking at the sun in the day. There's no need to peep." Klein retracted his magic mirror and added with a smile, "Besides, this is just an item. How can it commit a crime?" "That really makes sense." Biles and Phil couldn't help but nod. After Roy figured it out, he exhaled and asked, "Next, the most important thing is to find that item, but we don't have any clues. As a book, it can be anywhere. We can only carpet search the entire city, but we clearly lack the time to do that. Indeed, we don't know where 0-02 is. We don't even have any clues, but there's an existence that knows the answer very clearly," Klein replied leisurely as he heard the footsteps echoing in the sewers. Pasha's heart stirred. "You mean that chief shepherd?" Klein smiled and nodded. 0-02 is either in his hands, or it has been hidden by him somewhere. And a book is clearly unable to move on its own. This isn't something that the current rules can help it achieve. "But how do we find that chief shepherd?" Biles blurted out. Perhaps it was because the magical Mr. Magician was by his side. He wasn't that afraid of searching for the grounded angel. Klein calmly held the lantern and said, "As long as 0-02 doesn't provide the chief shepherd immunity, he too would have to abide by the laws on the notice. He was originally from Fay Sac, so he is undoubtedly not a citizen of Belton. He is unable to enjoy the treatment of the locals. Similarly, although he is an angel from elsewhere and not a foreigner in the narrow sense of the word, he isn't human. He too will be pursued by the citizens. This can be confirmed. In short, that chief shepherd has to abide by the curfew and not trespass private residences. He can't hide in a public area that isn't open to the public at night. At the same time, as a fugitive, he likely doesn't have companions who have dual traits like Biles. Tell me, where do you think he will be?" Roy's eyes darted around as he gave several answers. Sewers, cemetery, cathedral before midnight, abandoned buildings. "You can't enter the cemetery at night. The abandoned buildings are owned by someone or some group by virtue of its property rights," Pasha reminded. "Yes. Once the sewers are restricted, we will head to the cathedral to search for the chief shepherd or wait for him," Klein said in a relaxed tone as though he was deciding on a trivial matter. Roy, Phil, and the others were stunned. They hadn't expected that they would be able to lock onto their target so easily. It just took a few words of discussion to expose an angel's whereabouts. However, there are quite a few cathedrals in Belton. We have to act in concert to save time. Also, the cathedral might be able to forcefully resist the punishment by relying on his level as an angel and his powers. With that said, Klein lowered his head and said to the magic mirror in his hand, "Arods, monitor the entire city and pay attention to any anomalies." After giving his instructions to the mirror, Klein once again dragged Mam Ariana out of the fog of history and asked her to be in charge of the cathedrals of the Church of Evernight. After doing so, he turned around and said to Roy, Pasha and company, "If we still can't find the chief shepherd after all that is done, it means that he has either left Belton, leaving 0-02 behind to attack the enemy, or he has already gained control of 0-02 to a certain extent. In short, we can proceed by means of elimination for now." Roy and company nodded in unison as they continued following Klein in the sewers. After a few minutes, the ancient silver mirror reflected a scene. On the signboard, there was another piece of paper with new rules. Because of municipal maintenance works, no living being is allowed to enter the sewers from now on. Content is being added at an increasing rate. Klein frowned indiscernibly as he muttered to himself before taking out a human-skinned glove. Immediately after, he gestured for Pasha and the others to hold hands. Then, he grabbed one of them by the shoulder and led them out of the sewers to teleport to the nearest storm cathedral. During this process, the four Beyonders first saw the rats and cockroaches in the sewers twitching as they died one after another. Following that, they were attracted by the strange and abstract spirit world, as though they had suffered some sort of catharsis at the mental level. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.